Hey everybody, welcome to BigBlackHatMan's Western Movie Show. The title we're going with? Yeah, I think it's a nice, short, and to the point. Either that or really, lazy and unoriginal. Wow, this show's off to a great start. Dun, dun, dun. And then that really average opening. Looks like you really broke the budget with that one there, bucko. Whatever. Today we're talking about the Magnificent Seven.
Brenner, McQueen, Coburn, Vaughn, Brunson, Buckholtz, Dexter. The Magnificent Seven.
At least we're starting off talking about a good movie. Thanks for that. At any rate, The Magnificent Seven came out in 1960 and was based on Akira Kurosawa's film, The Seven Samurai. So this one has quite the legacy to begin with. If you haven't seen The Seven Samurai, it's an excellent film. So what's The Magnificent Seven about? Well, let's put it pretty simply. It's about a group of men who go down to a small Mexican village to defend it for very little pay. They're all out-of-work gunfighters, and it's the only trade they know, so even though this job doesn't pay much, it's what they go down to do. The star of the film is Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen as the two main characters. The two heads of the gunfighting group, and they go down to this village, persuading the other gunfighters to go with them, and that's pretty much it for the plot. There's nuance, there's character building, there's a lot of things in between, but overall the plot's kept pretty straightforward, which is nice. Now there's some betrayal and some intrigue in the film that I don't really want to tell you about because I want you to see the film, and if I give away the plot, you may not want to see it. Something like that. I am telling you what the movie's about, but I'm not, giving away the twist. It's not much of a twist. It's the point is that you need to watch the film because it's actually really good. I'll talk about the characters in a bit. Just cut away. Do a cutaway so we can move on from this awkwardness. Please.
I'm going into the hills for the winter. Where am I going to get the food for my men?
Buy it or grow it.
Or maybe even work for it. Somehow I don't think you solved my problem.
We deal in lead, friend.
Solving your problems isn't our lot.
Well, this movie received a lot of praise when it came out and became an instant classic. It's still thought of very well today. Magnificent Seven is one of the classic westerns people refer to when they talk about big-time westerns. Yeah, it had to be great. I mean, how else would we get a bajillion really crappy sequels and one decent TV series in the 90s? It didn't last, of course, because nothing ever lasts for westerns anymore. I mean, how many bad shows get that? Well, honestly, more than you'd think, but the sequels are a different matter altogether. They're not particularly good, and they're not something I really want to talk about. The TV show's not bad, and maybe that's a subject for another day. But right now we're concentrating on the classic, the instant classic that was the 1960 release of The Magnificent Seven. Of course, it was a big-time classic. Why else would we be talking about it on this show? If it wasn't a classic, we probably wouldn't know about it. Okay, that's actually a really fair point. Why would we be talking about it if it wasn't a classic? Well, let's talk about why The Magnificent Seven is a big-time classic. It came out in 1960, which is a very pivotal time in the history of westerns. You see, westerns in the post-World War II era, the 40s and the 50s, were dominated by John Ford and Howard Hawks, right? And the whole attitude that those westerns brought with them. These westerns were positive, good guys versus bad guys, with exceptions and things, and there's sort of grainy areas, and there's a whole undercurrent, and there's subgenres of the western. And there's lots of nuance to be argued, but the genre was dominated by those heroic-style westerns. Even westerns that had negative tones, say High Noon or The Searchers, ended on a high note. They left the audience feeling kind of good about what they'd seen. So I would say those films were more cheery on the whole. Even though they could have a negative tone throughout the film, they tried to bring you back up at the end. Red River is actually a good example of this because the film could have easily ended on a very negative note, but they pulled you back at the last second and said, no, see, everything's good. Post-1960s, westerns got a little more dour. Sergio Leone, Sam Peckinpah came around, and their westerns definitely didn't have the positive undercurrents or even the positive endings that we would get from those previous westerns. Some of them do have positive endings, but they don't really dwell on it or aim for it at all times. And there's definitely a much more negative attitude. Not to say it's a bad thing. In fact, in some ways, it provides more drama. It gives the audience more to invest in. It feels more realistic at times. So both sides have their advantages, right? I mean, I consider the two eras interesting eras. A golden period when westerns were very dominant in the 40s and 50s, and audiences really flocked to them. And then a silver era where the audience became more selective, and there was definitely more thematic things and more nuance. And in the middle, in the bridge, you have Magnificent Seven. And the reason it's such a great bridge between the two sides is that the characters in the film take a very negative view of their profession, gunfighting. They're down and out, they're dour, there's nothing more for them to do. But at the same time, even though they're these sort of downtrodden characters, they're taking what they have left and doing something positive in defending a Mexican village, this small, defenseless Mexican village. So it has elements of both. It's something the older generation could appreciate because they are doing a very noble thing, and something the newer generation could appreciate because, you know, these characters are saddened by their profession, by their outlook on life, by everything they are. A good example of this, let me say this here. In 1959, Rio Bravo comes out, and Rio Bravo is a John Wayne Western that I really like. But it's very good guys versus bad guys. You know, this is the right side, that's the wrong side. The ending is very upbeat. The good guys are very good by the end. Everything is right with them. It's a kind of a happily ever after story in some ways. I know there's some negativity to the film, but it's definitely a very upbeat film. John Wayne, again, 1962, comes out with John Ford, who had led the previous era. They come out with a film called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. This film takes Western mythos and just gives it a smack and says, no, this was all crap. And negative and down, and the ending is so sad when you think about it. And so that really reflects the new attitude, and Ford and Wayne got into that attitude, and Wayne would actually do more with that. He's actually a bridge between the two as himself because he does stuff on both sides of it, and maybe I'll talk about that extensively one day. But in the middle you have The Magnificent Seven, which is a great film because it's a great film and because it bridges this gap so nicely. It does what American culture was doing at this time in progressing. So if you want a little history in American culture, like, this is the perfect film. Like, this is a great film to show because it shows the attitudes of both the 1950s and the 1960s and the difference between them. Well, my take is that this is a really good movie. Wow. Don't oversell it there, buckaroo. And it's also based on a really good movie. Ooh! Nothing like pushing an all-time great. You show a little enthusiasm. Okay, what do you want? What would suffice to extol the Magnificent Seven? Well, now that you've asked. It's great! Brenner, McQueen, Wallach! Man, all the action and the horses and the shooting, bang, 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 bang! And they go around and they do all sorts of stuff. Adventure! Yeah! And there's poor people in there, innocent, oh, and they're scared. But the heroes come out and they're like, oh, we will protect you, poor people. Ha ha! And then there's betrayal, and there's love, and there's intrigue. Yeah! And there's all sorts of horses. Did I mention the horses? All sorts of horses in this film. It's great! It's a wonderful film. However, attempting to be a touch more objective. Well, sure, if you want to sound all smart about it. As opposed to sounding dumb about it? Touché. Whatever. Here's the point, folks. This is a really good film. The acting, really solid. McQueen, Brenner, Wallach, Charles Bronson as a young man, James Coburn. I could go on and on with the acting. I will say Horst Buchholz here, he's in one of his first roles, and he's a little shaky at times, especially with all the great actors around him. But he does a decent job as the young gunfighter of the group of seven. The scenes are really well done. It's the Mexican desert, and it's really scenic, and they throw in trees and creeks and things and give you a real sense of place, and I like that about this film. And I like the pacing of this film. It's a well-paced film. It's just a touch under 2 hours, and as opposed to the original Seven Samurai, which is 3 hours. I will say the original Seven Samurai does some things I like better, of course, naturally. They develop the villagers much better. The villagers in Magnificent Seven are not all that interesting. They don't do much except for at one small point in the film, but for the most part, they're kind of inconsequential, which is a little frustrating when compared to the original. But I will say this: they do the villains better than the Seven Samurai did, because in the Seven Samurai you didn't really know the villains. This one we have Eli Wallach, who just is so great as the head of this, Mexican bandit group, and he's such a jerk. You just love to hate the guy, and it's Wallach, who's also in, people know from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, it's Tuco, and he's equally good in this film. If you've seen that one, haven't seen this one. The plot of this film, I can't say enough about the plot of this film, because this is a really interesting plot. Akira Kurosawa really hit it out of the park with this plot. You feel so much for the 7 main characters. They all have very interesting backgrounds. Now, they were changed from film to film. There was combinations of characters and different little alterations, and it was Americanized, naturally, as you would expect. But all of them have personality. All of them have their reasons for what they're doing. All of them exist realistically. And that's what makes this film so interesting. The final line of this film, and I'm going to give you the final line of this film because it doesn't really give away the plot, but it is one of the most brilliant lines in Western cinematic history. As Steve McQueen and Yul Brynner are riding away, Steve McQueen turns to Yul Brynner's character and says, "I guess we won." And in reply he says, "No, we lost. We always lose." He says the farmers won. I kind of misquoted it, but the point is that, because they're gunfighters, there's nothing for them to win. And that was the transitional attitude I was talking about earlier. But it's such a great summation of the entire thought process behind the film. And that line just sticks with me every time I see the movie. That is a beautiful line and a great work. Of course, it's in the original. It's in the Seven Samurai. They took the line directly, and it works. And it works really well. So go check out The Magnificent Seven. I can't emphasize this enough. It didn't make the FI's top 10. I don't know why, because it's such a great film. And so, hey, go check it out. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you again here on the Cinematic Range.